Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and friends and colleagues. It's amazing to think, wow, we're at the end of this year's BETD. And I think the one thought I have had is that if we didn't have the Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue, well, we would have to invent it. Because I think we've seen that more than ever in the last couple of days, how important it is to come together, how important it is to connect, to learn, but also just as human beings, to see each other from all around the world and think about how we can work forward to solutions. And one thing, I was just having a conversation with one of the participants, and he said to me, you know, he felt that this year was the best year he had been here for two reasons. One was because the panel discussions were really real. They weren't scripted, that people really brought their experience in and had real conversations, and therefore he learned a lot. And also because the networking opportunities were great, and they were so well organized. And so to start with, I actually want to say a huge thank you to the whole BETD team that made this possible. The civil society organizers, also colleagues here in the Foreign Office. Can I just ask you to stand up or put your hands up or something? I know this is unconventional, but can the team stand up to just say, all right, who was here to make this all possible? Thanks so much. These are disruptive things, but we're in a disruptive moment right now. And I know how much work and how many hours went into what you all did to make this possible. And I think the timing was also incredible. We met a week after the IPCC published its synthesis report. So there couldn't have been a better time, because I think we all see those burning embers in that report. If you haven't read it, it's the best way of getting up to date on the latest science, so required reading. And we know that it's such a critical point in time, and that this decade is the critical decade to determine what will happen, as I said last night, for the coming thousands of years. So we have a task of historic proportions. And you know, we always talk about the energy transition, but actually we're talking about, it goes way beyond energy. We're talking about a transition that really will change the way of life of many, of how we travel, how we build our cities, how we get our kids to school, how we power our homes, all of those things. And as Minister Baerbock said yesterday, this transition will change the world more than anything else since the Industrial Revolution. And change, I thought, as Minister Habeck so eloquently put this morning, is challenging. And it means that we need to also be honest about the transition. That when we're talking with citizens, we need to hear and listen to them about what their fears are and how you go through change. Change can be very scary, but actually change can also be very empowering. And so we've heard a lot about that, and the importance also that not everyone is going to profit from this, and therefore that climate justice has to be at the core, and a just transition has to be at the core of this world that we are creating. Because we know if we don't change, well, then we're all going to be much worse off, and the most vulnerable front and center. So that's why it's so crucial that we engage with each other, that we forge strong partnerships to manage this transition and to shape it in a way that really creates those new opportunities and the jobs and the security for people. And also what I find really exciting is the chance, in a way, I find it a huge privilege. It's very challenging, but to be alive and working in this field at this moment of history. Because what we're doing is not only changing the very way of our economy, but we also are forging new partnerships. We're fostering new ways of working together. And I think that working together with shared values, but also shared interests, gives us a chance to shift also in this critical moment in the world where we are many ways going apart, to bring us together around a collective challenge and making the world better for each of our own populations, our own people. So That's also why I think the BETD has been so important, because getting those unconventional ways of working together, I think, is just key. And the other thing, I think perhaps I find this is when you're in these conversations, gosh, I'm not alone with the challenge I have. I'm not alone in the trying to figure out how to do this or in trying to make a difference. And I think we've heard so many inspiring stories the last couple of days, and the examples, certainly from Kenya's President Ruto, impressively setting out his ambition for Kenya, not only for his own country, but for his continent and for the world, to become a green energy hub, powered by renewables, 100% renewables in 2030. And how they want to use the continent's superabundance of solar potential as a catalyst for decentralized electrification, for sustainable growth and prosperity in Africa, and the creation of an export market. Again, a shift. Wow, let's step into that. And we heard about the incoming COP president's bold vision for COP28, a tripling of renewable energy, he said, is needed. And so those are the pieces that we take. I mean, we know that it's not a future we're building. We know, and you are experiencing, this isn't futuristic. Maybe 9 years ago it might have seemed that way, but now it's very here and now. Whether it be the woman I met in Chennai who was an amazing advocate going around working for the local government, getting solar panels on hospitals and schools, or whether it be the Minister of Niger working to try and get solar panels on refugee camps to provide energy access there in a clean and sustainable way. But, as Anya said, and we know it's not fast enough, and so we're heading in that right direction, but I think it's quite clear we need to scale that up, and I think that's been a whole range of the conversations that you have been having in the last couple of days. And sometimes it can be quite profane what the barriers are. I heard one person from the private sector said, I can build a 50 megawatt solar wind farm within a year, but it takes me 6 years to get permits, right? And so I think these pieces of the Bureau overcoming and learning from each other is so important. And I have always thought that we have to find ways of accelerating the learning process. Because we have to move quickly. So let's learn from our mistakes in Germany and learn from others who are moving faster. So we know from the World Energy Transition Outlook, we know where we have to go. We have a roadmap. We know we need more investment, 3 times more investment to get on that 1.5 track, and we need them to go where are most needed. That is not happening today. 85% of global renewable energy investments benefited less than 50% of the world population. And so we need to bring those financial levers, the financing into Africa, Latin America, Asia, Central Eastern Europe, everywhere, moving forward. And I think President Ruto, just to bring him back into the room again, was quite clear how important the discussions on international financial sector reform are this year. And I just, any of you who are involved in that, please, if you're not, get involved, because I think those decisions going into the COP and the meetings of the World Bank and the IMF are fundamental. So we know the targets we have and where we need to go, and we know we need to build up the human capacity to be able to do that. I think, friends and colleagues, let's build on the conversations we've had here. Let's roll up our sleeves. Let's find those ways of collaborating in new and different ways. Radical collaboration on multi-level, 4 or 5-dimensional is absolutely fundamental. And I think just building a bridge from here to going into the COP, I think if we look forward, as the incoming COP president said, it's about how we course correct. We know we're not on course. There is something called the global stock take, which is a very important moment. Those of us who were in Paris, we knew almost then that it wasn't enough, the pledges weren't enough to get us there. Now we know even more so that we're not on track for any of the Paris goals. So we need the catalyst and we need that transformational roadmap. And I think Irina yesterday laid that out for renewable energies, and it can certainly create much more healthier, much more prosperous and resilient future. And at the end of the day, we're talking about well-being. We're talking about well-being of people. We don't talk too much about ecosystems and biodiversity. I think Minister Lemke certainly brought that in here as well, but we're talking about well-being of the planet. So let's all, I'm sure, I know what I like to do after these meetings, to think about, okay, what are the 2 things that I'm going to do differently now that I learned? I think there's more that I learned in the last 2 days from everyone here. Step into this disruptive opening that we have, that in this moment of change. And I think if we are successful, and we have to be successful, then we can each make such a difference to create a more equal, a more peaceful, and a more sustainable world, a prosperous one for people, and I would like to put it in a way of a good life for hundreds of millions of people around the planet. So I think it's time to get to work, and that's the beauty of it. Take those 2 things, go home, think about that, be thinking about those new ways of collaborating. We're open for everything, I think that's for sure. And let's know that we will come back in a year. And one minister said to me today, I'd like to know what we accomplished in this year in between the last BETD and this one. So let's look forward to BETD 24 in March 24, where we can come back and each of us can say, okay, what were those 2 things? What did I make change? How did I accelerate? And how did I make the world better for my community, my family, and for the global community? So with that, I'd like to, first of all, make the official transition from this year and officially, I think, close this meeting and get the green sofa ready for next year. So that's...
Yeah.